Hi guys! I hope you're all well. I'm just gonna wait for a minute. We're going live today with one of my friends, CJ, and he's a journalist from Australia and is really big against fighting against RSS. Oh, okay. All right, there we go. So let me send him the invite. Let's hope it works. Can you all hear me? Hello.
Hi, Monica.
Hi, how are you?
Wait, I can't hear. Let me see the.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Otherwise, I'll try this.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now. Unfortunately, I can't hear you with my microphone in. So you're going to have to do without the microphone. So it's going to be ordinary audio quality.
Well, I can hear you, so that's great. So I found CJ on Twitter, and I'm just going to give a brief intro about you. That you're very, very active when it comes to talking about RSS and in Hindutva. By the way, good morning. CJ's in Australia, so it's morning over there and night here. And recently, you've also been talking a lot about Palestine. So I'm going to give it to you and give you a chance to introduce yourself and talk about the work that you do.
Okay, sure. Yeah, as you said, my name is CJ Werleman. I'm a journalist, columnist. I have a column with Byline Times, which is a UK newspaper. Also for Inside Arabia, which is a Washington, D.C. based magazine. Also write for TRT World on a regular basis and a number of other newspapers on an ad hoc basis. But most of my work is centered around exposing injustices against Muslim minorities and victims of the war on terror. You know, I guess I was one of the first Western journalists to report on the persecution of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, China, or what was East Turkestan. Same with the genocide that took place in Myanmar in 2016-17 by the Myanmar security forces against the Rohingya minority there, but also, you know, Islamophobia, discrimination in general, and you know, I do report a lot also on Kashmir and as you mentioned in the introduction, also the rising fascist government in your country or your home country, you know, India. So yeah, I guess that's a broad brush.
So how did you get into this? Like, and especially, you know, talking about India and the rise of Hindutva there, like what led you to, you know, want to talk about it, to learn about it?
Okay, this is a really long story. So I'll do my best to give you just the bullet points. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, this story could take an hour, but I'll try and condense it into about 2 minutes. I got into journalism and human rights activism somewhat by accident. I was living in Indonesia at the time. Lived in Indonesia for a decade, from 2002 to 2012. In 2005, I witnessed a terrorist attack carried out by an Al-Qaeda offshoot or an Al-Qaeda franchise called Jamaat Islamiyah. And that was in Bali on Jimbaran Beach. Two suicide bombers detonated themselves amongst, you know, people having diners on Jimbaran Beach, women and children and the like. So myself and roughly about 4 other friends, we were effectively the first responders that night. We had to sort out the living from the dead and bring the wounded, figure out who was alive and put them on sort of makeshift gurneys. We brought them up to the road where eventually, you know, the actual first responders did turn up. But I became obsessed with all the events that happened that night. You know, I'm not going to get into the graphic details, but
Yeah.
you can imagine it was horrific. And I sort of became obsessed with trying to get into the minds of what could motivate 2 young men in their early 20s to strap on a backpack full of ball bearings and rat poison and nails and detonate themselves amongst innocent men and women. And I blamed religion, and in particular, I blamed Islam for what had happened. And so that set me on a route, and I sort of devoured all of his anti-religious texts and anti-religious writers from Christopher Hitchens to Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and the likes. And then I wrote my own book, which was published in 2008, called God Hates You, Hate Him Back. And didn't really blame, it wasn't really about Islam per se, but the book was about, condemning religion but, in reality, the more heinous or troubling scriptures from the Bible, from the Old Testament in particular. But shortly after that, I started studying terrorism. I went back to university and studied terrorism at academic level, postgraduate level, and then also I did work with an Islamic scholar in Jakarta who taught me what the hadiths and the surahs of the Quran mean. And after studying terrorism and studying Islam, I came to realize that everything I wrote about religion in my book was completely wrong. And the book has since been depublished, but the book did really well in the United States, or really it did modestly well in the United States, and so that got me into journalism. And so my journalism, has stems from a viewpoint of trying to right the wrongs that I had made in publishing that book in the first place. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I got into all of this on accident too, with the farmers' protest, and because it affected my family personally. And I think whenever you see something like that, or you see your own community or your family members affected by something, it wakes you up. Now, let's move on to India, because I from seeing your tweets and everything, I think that's one of your areas of expertise. So let's talk about the minorities there and how you got involved in talking about that, and what you think is, or what in your opinion is the issue right now.
Yeah, I mean, the central issue is Hindu nationalism, or the Hindutva ideology. Hindu nationalists or Hindutva organizations and groups have always been involved in politics in India, but at the fringes. But what we saw with Modi in 2014, those sentiments or that ideology moved from the fringes into the mainstream. And Modi has really consolidated power on the idea of transforming India into a Hindu Rashtra, or a tyrannical Hindu theocracy, if you will. At the core of that objective of transforming the nation in such a fundamental way, that means the expulsion of non-Hindu minorities, but particularly Muslims, because they represent 200 million, Indian citizens. So this project has gained steam, and ever since Modi's, BJP seized power in 2014, they've been slowly, gradually chipping away at the rights of Muslims and other religious minorities, culminating in the Supreme Court verdict, which paved the way for the ancient Babri Mosque to be a new Hindu temple to be built on its ruins. Culminating also with a pair of anti-Muslim citizenship laws, the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens bills. These bills are purposely designed to identify Muslims and to ban Muslims or expel Muslims, particularly undocumented migrants and the like. Then we had the Delhi riots, or the Delhi pogrom, in February the year before last, which resulted in the deaths of 54 Muslims over the course of several days. But then what we saw in August 5th in 2019 was the India stripping away of Kashmir's self-autonomous status, which now paves the way for a Hindu settler colonial project in the disputed territory. And the Modi government has already handed out 200,000 domicile certificates to non-Kashmiri natives, or none of them who are Muslim, all Hindu. So what you're going to see, you already have 800,000 Indian soldiers in the territory. So soldiers will become permanent residents, new migrants will come in, transforming the identity and the demography of Kashmir in a way which will mirror what Israel is doing in the Palestinian territories, but only faster. I mean, what India, at this pace, what India is doing in Kashmir, they will accomplish in Kashmir what Israel, it's taken 50 years. They'll accomplish probably in 3 to 5 years what took Israel 50 years in the Palestinian territories. I mean, this is ethnic cleansing or slow motion genocide by any other name. So with the Hindu nationalist ideology or the Hindu ideology, you've got this expulsion of Muslims in Assam, the ethnic cleansing of Muslims in Kashmir, and I mean, it's not people just like journalists like me or human rights activists who are sounding these alarm bells, but also the world's most, eminent scholars in genocide and ethnic cleansing saying that India finds itself, India's Muslim population finds itself on the brink of genocide.
Yeah.
So this is very terrifying time.
So in layman's term, explain what it means to strip away Kashmir's autonomous status, because a lot of my followers their background is Punjabi, so they won't understand the context of that.
Yeah, so Kashmir is disputed territory, but under the Indian constitution, it was to be left alone by self-government. So India would not rule. So you have Kashmiri politicians determining, the rules of the territory. Mm-hmm. So on August 5th of 2019, the Indian government said that no longer applies. Which violated the Indian constitution, stripping away Kashmiri's right to self-govern. Then jailed and imprisoned Kashmiri political leaders, and has now installed basically an extension of New Delhi's arm in the territory. So what we're seeing from this point on, you're seeing a purging of Kashmiris from government jobs, and they're being replaced by Hindu settler migrants. You're going to have these settler outposts turn into settlements, and these settlements will turn into towns and cities of their own accord, like has happened in the Palestinian territories. So it's basically India taking away Kashmir's right to self-govern and forcing its rule even further, its colonial rule, even entrenching it further and deeper into the territory.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I'll just add also in total defiance of multiple UN resolutions, even UN resolutions as recent as 2019, that Kashmir is a disputed territory and Kashmiris have the right to self-determination. 100%.
I actually am not very educated on the UN resolutions on Kashmir, but I do know that Kashmir has been declared a disputed territory by the United Nations. Can we talk about Palestine a little bit? Because I'm not very well educated on that, but I know because I've been looking at your tweets that you are. So explain to us what's going on there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we're seeing is just, we're seeing the brutality of Israel's colonial rule on our television sets again. And this happens periodic. But just because we're seeing it on our television sets today doesn't mean this kind of brutality wasn't being carried out against the Palestinians yesterday and a week ago and 2 weeks ago and several months ago. But Israel is using protests, popular and widespread Palestinian protests against the ethnic cleansing of a Palestinian neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah, which is only located, probably 100 meters away from the old city of Jerusalem, the ancient old city of Jerusalem. These Palestinians, 28 Palestinian families, totaling 500 individuals, are being forcibly expelled from their homes, rendered homeless. A lot of these Palestinian families operate their businesses from these homes. But Palestinians within the 1967, Palestinians who are living under Israeli rule in the state of Israel, of which is about 2 million of them, have been organizing, a social media-driven protest to protest against the forced evictions, the forced expulsion, the violent expulsion of these families. And because these protests have garnered international attention, it's made Israel very nervous because Israel doesn't want You know, it's colonial rule and it's war. I mean, these are war crimes.
Yeah.
Forcibly expelling Palestinians from, you know, occupied Palestinian territory constitutes a war crime. So Israel took resentment to this media attention and launched a crackdown. And what Israel always does is its crackdowns are always meant to collectively punish the rest of the Palestinian population. So to send a message to the Palestinians, it sent in Israeli security forces on the final Friday prayers of Ramadan at Al-Aqsa Mosque, you know, the third most holiest site in Islam, carried out a raid. You know, thousands of Palestinian worshippers, Israeli settlers also participated in this raid, spraying Palestinian worshippers with tear gas, rubber-coated steel bullets, flashbang grenades, leaving hundreds of Palestinians injured and dozens hospitalized. Now you can imagine the outrages caused around, you know, around the world. Then Hamas responded by firing rockets into Israel for its raid on Al-Aqsa Mosque. And now we have this tit-for-tat violence between Israeli security forces in Gaza. And so Israel has been bombing Gaza relentlessly for the last 48 hours. And particularly just before we came on air here in your Instagram chat, you know, Israel had carried out, you know, a wave of sorties on Israel, including a building, a residential building, and also a building located next door to where Al Jazeera journalists are stationed. So it seems to, you know, but for us who remember the 2014 war and invasion of Gaza, this has all the hallmarks of the same sort of, you know, the same kind of operation. We're seeing military units being deployed to the Gaza fence at the moment. And you're going to see more air raids, more civilians killed, as, you know, American politicians and Israel's allies try to cloud the issue by saying Israel has a right to self-defense, a right which is never afforded to the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually there was a representative or a spokesperson for the United States State Department, and somebody asked him, like, okay, Israel has a right to self-defense. Doesn't Palestine as well? And he mumbled his answer. He didn't have a response. And I've been seeing all day, like, I actually commented on a Times article because I forgot what they said, but they were kind of like, oh, they kind of put the blame on Palestine, that Palestine started it, whatever, you know, whatever happened. And like Reuters and a bunch of like very prominent media houses are incorrectly describing what's going on.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, let's talk about that for a little bit. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what, you know, I've actually got a piece coming out for TRT World, which speaks exactly to what you're talking about. You know, when Israeli settlers, you know, who were allies of the Netanyahu government, the Netanyahu government actually incited this rally. You had hundreds of Israeli settlers 2 weeks ago marching through the streets of Jerusalem, chanting "Death to Arabs." Now, did the U.S. government respond by saying, hey, Palestinians have a right to self-defense? No, they didn't. When Israeli settlers invaded the homes of these Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah, in telling them to get out of their own properties, trespassing, invading, threatening to kill them, threatening to rape their wives and daughters. And when Israeli soldiers came in, injuring and killing Palestinian protesters who were protesting against these forced evictions, did the U.S. government say Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? No, it didn't. When Israel's security forces stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque, injuring hundreds and putting dozens in the hospital, again, the U.S. government didn't condemn these atrocities in a single-handed manner. And again, it didn't say Palestinians have a right to defend themselves. You know, 35 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza in the last 24 hours. And again, the U.S. government doesn't say the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves. And that clip you were talking about was Ned Price, who is a U.S. State Department spokesperson. He was asked, well, do the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? After he had categorically said Israel has a right to defend themselves, Israel being the aggressor in this situation. Yeah. And he said, oh, well, we believe all states have a right to defend themselves. And a second journalist who picked up on that very quickly, well, I see the problem in your answer. The problem in your answer is you said all states have a right to defend themselves. Do you regard Palestine as a state? and he refused to answer that question because because under international law and the United Nations, Palestine is a state. But if he admits that, then he has to admit that Palestinians have a right to self-defense, which he refused to do. So it's, it's very sinister and very duplicitous the way they handle this.
So why is the State Department not recognizing Palestine as a state?
Well, because if they do, then they have to afford, Palestinians the same right to defend themselves, like, as Israel does. So.
Yeah. The worst part is that our tax-paying dollars, what we work for, we're paying for that. Let's not forget the United States gives Israel billions.
And while you don't have universal health care. So,
we are paying
and Israelis have universal health care because that's what they don't have to spend $5 billion a year on their military because we give them $5 billion. Well, you guys, the United States gives them $5 billion a year to give towards health care. So it's crazy trade-off.
I'm like I was actually talking to someone about this last night. It's like we paid for the deaths of those children. That should ring heavy on every American. Like our government, the government we elected and we paid taxes to, they paid for that. And it's heartbreaking when you think about it like that, and I don't know, like the circle of just like let's shed a blind eye because the other person is less than. That's what it essentially is, right? This mindset of, all right, let this slide because this person doesn't have the same right to self-determination as this person, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's sad. That's all it is. It's sad. And
the problem is the Palestinians don't have a wealthy lobby group to bribe and cajole and coerce U.S. congressmen and U.S. senators to vote or say pro-Palestinian things, whereas the Israeli lobby is arguably the most powerful political interest lobby in Washington, D.C. Every single U.S. congressman and senator absolutely fears the wrath of the Israeli lobby. And that's why they speak out both sides of their mouth, even when Israel is the aggressor, because they don't want the Israeli lobby to earn the ire of the Israeli lobby, and then the Israeli lobby will fund their political opponent in the next election cycle.
That's the same thing happens with the Indian lobby. That's the same thing that happens with the Indian lobby. So they don't talk about the rise of RSS and the rise of Hindutva. Like Twitter openly is giving money to Seva International, and Seva International is literally picking up girls to kind of brainwash them into becoming Hindus. Like that's the kind of stuff that's going on that the United States government is turning a blind eye to, and it's ridiculous. And yes, the size and type of lobby in Washington, D.C. is very important. That's why I spent so much time in the beginning of the farmers' protest talking about the issues with the Sikh lobby or the Sikh caucus. Okay, so that's that with Palestine. So where do we see this conflict going? Like, what do you see happening, or what would be the ideal situation? Do you think the United Nations will intervene at some point?
No, that you won't, because no, there can never be intervention against Israel's military aggression because the US has a veto vote on the United States Security Council. So there'll only be words of condemnation coming out of the UN General Assembly, but the General Assembly has no ability to enforce resolutions, only pass resolutions. But what's going to happen? Israel, this is very convenient for Israel. Israel likes to do this. This is part of their overall strategy. It's called mowing the lawn. And so, when the grass grows too high, you put in a lawnmower and you cut the grass down. In this case, when Israel talks about mowing the lawn, the grass being Palestinian resistance. So when Palestinian resistance starts to grow against its occupation, they look for a pretext to start a war. And so they can use overwhelming military force to completely crush that resistance. And they believe that mowing the lawn is required somewhere between every 7 and 10 years, because it takes that long for a new cycle of Palestinian resistance to grow. from Palestinian resistance from a protest level to a militia level. And you think about the last invasion of Gaza was 2014, so it was 7 years ago. And that operation, that invasion of Gaza resulted in the deaths of 2,400 Palestinians, including 500 children. So if we use that as a benchmark of what could happen going forward, now that we know that Israel is deploying military units to the Gaza security fence and increasing its number of air raids, warplane attacks on the Palestinian enclave, this could be a tragedy of equal size or greater. Which would be, just catastrophic for a territory which has already been deemed unlivable by the United Nations, largely due to Israel's attack on Gaza in 2014.
Wow. It's sad. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is people are making this a Muslim versus Christian or Muslim versus Jewish debate. And it's not. Because Palestine does have Christians. There are Palestinian Jews as well. There's a broad spectrum of people that live there. So talk about what the actual issue is. Like, what's the tension?
Yeah, but it has absolutely nothing to do with religion. It has to do with the fact that you have a settler colonial population and you have an indigenous population. The indigenous population so happened to be predominantly Muslim, but if they were predominantly Christian, it wouldn't matter. Because the settler colonial project which is Zionism, which is an ethno-nationalist ideology. The Zionists see Palestine as, restoring their religious homeland that they had 2,000 years ago, whereas the Palestinians have lived there uninterrupted, since forever. The issue is there's settler colonialists, which are typically European, American. I mean, if you go to the West Bank, which I have many times, you've got 600,000 settlers living in the occupied West Bank. You have American accented, Jewish settlers everywhere. I mean, but these settlers can move in. If you're a Jew, an American Jew or a European Jew, you can get a citizenship to Israel tomorrow. It would take you 24 hours before you're on a plane and living there with full citizenship rights, including universal health care and the like. So yeah, but if you're let's say you're a Palestinian but your parents or grandparents were forcibly evicted and displaced during the Nakba, which was in 1948, or during the 1967 war. If you're displaced and you're living in a refugee camp in Lebanon or Syria or Jordan or Saudi Arabia, you cannot return to your homeland. Even if you own property still in Israel or the Palestinian territories, Israel will not allow you to return home. But if you're an American Jew who's never been to Israel, has no tied connections to the territory whatsoever, you can welcome straight in. So it's all about changing the demography and making it, a Jewish-only state for Jews only. Because the biggest the biggest threat to that project to transform the land into a Jewish-only state, or Israel into a Jewish-only state, is the fact that 2 million Palestinians live as Israeli citizens in Israel proper. Plus, you have 4 million Palestinians who live in the Palestinian territories. So if Israel becomes one state, which eventually it will have to be, because two-state died years ago, then how can Israel Israel can either call itself a Jewish state, therefore it must be an apartheid state, or it can choose to be a democracy. But if it chooses to be a democracy, it has to give equal rights and vote to the Palestinians, which it never will.
Yeah. I'm all like, but like, say if it starts calling itself a democracy and has an election, like that would just completely destroy whatever ideology, whatever they're trying to do,
Yeah, if every Palestinian had a vote in the Palestinian territories, there'd never be a Jewish Israeli who'd win an election ever again. Unlike, certainly not by a majority.
100%.
Yeah.
Wow, that severely, severely heartbreaking. What about the media? Like, I wanna hold on. I have to throw someone out of here. Yeah. I get a lot of these like BJP RSS people because I support the farmers protest. So
Oh
um
my God, I can only imagine.
yeah, so the harassment is real, but we deal with
I,
it.
just on that point, and I'm sorry that it happens to you, but yeah, my wife and daughter deals with this constantly because they try and target them through me, and it's always. I mean, I get rape threat, sorry, death threats and threats from all kinds of people that I cover, from Zionists to Assad regime followers to right-wing Americans, but
Mhm.
it's almost the rape threats and death threats are almost exclusively from Hindu nationalists.
Yes,
So I
dude.
can only imagine what your inbox looks like.
Oh my God. So the thing is like I laugh because I know that they're empty threats, that like there's not much they can do. But it's just the ideology that's at play, right? Imagine what the standard of women in their own homes is if they're comfortable with using that language with a woman that they don't even know. And maybe this is maybe a really good topic to get into, the how women are treated under, Modi's regime, or like Modi's party, because whether it's wearing ripped jeans or, saying women don't belong outside of the household, like there's a step back from reality. What
Yeah,
would you have to say about that?
yeah. I mean, it's, these nationalist ideologies are very very uh, meshed with patriarchy
Yeah.
and misogyny. If you look at white nationalist movements and white supremacist movements, well, misogyny goes hand in hand. You look at the fascist movements in Europe in the 1930s. I mean, these were hyper masculine, toxic masculine, anti-feminist movements at their core. I mean, there was no women in Hitler's senior leadership, and for a reason. And you're seeing the same type of misogyny, patriarchy being espoused by Modi government, under the guise of Hindu supremacism.
100%. And I like how you made the connect with white supremacists and Trump, because like that's a huge underlying current when it comes to that. It's almost
Yeah,
like women shouldn't have autonomy over their own body. That's where this like anti-abortion wave stems from as well. Like, you
yeah,
know, it's it's like a man should be able to say when he can have sex with us, when we need to have children, when we can't have children, this and that. There's like as a woman, I can't have autonomy within my own body, and that was a huge thing under Trump. And it was
yeah.
huge, especially in the South, in the areas where they make abortion illegal. Ideally, what they're saying is that a woman cannot have autonomy over her own body, and yeah, that's a
Yeah, it's
problem.
terrifying. And yeah, that's the Make a Great America Great Again movement, which is white nationalism,
Mm-hmm.
Hindu nationalism, the Nazism in Germany in the 1930s. They all harken back, try and sell an imagined past. It's all about selling an imagined past. Our country will be made better again if we go back to this greatness that we had, in a bygone era. And so, that naturally infers women going back to traditional roles. So that's why, to come back to your original question, that's why you're seeing the same kind of language used by Modi's government.
Yeah, it's devastating.
Yeah.
The COVID crisis, do you think it's disproportionately affecting minorities, lower class, and like low caste, or how RSS would term, like the
Yeah.
Dalit community, or like what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, but on the initial outbreak, during India's first and second wave, it predominantly affected, low-income Indians. It sort of ripped through the slums fast, for obvious reasons, overcrowding and, close proximity, excuse me, people have to each other, and the difficulty that poses, social distancing measures. But this third wave has ripped through all levels of society, and particularly the middle class. Um, it's It's frightening. I mean, I can only imagine what you're going through. I know when I speak with Indian expatriate friends of mine here in Australia, or Indian expatriate friends or colleagues of mine in the UK, for the UK newspaper I write for. Well, my editor-in-chief of that UK newspaper, she just lost both her uncles to
Wow.
COVID in India. And yeah, I mean, Indian friends I have here, they can't get difficulty getting hold of their relatives and so forth. If they've been hospitalized, it's hard to get information. And it's just, I mean, it's taken entire families out and down. It's going to take a long time for them for India to right this ship. I mean, I know they're going lockdown in most states at the moment, but these measures are too little, too late, and it's just been a total, the blame falls squarely on the shoulders of the Modi government.
Yes.
It's arrogance, it's corruption, vanity. I mean, India is people overlook the fact that India is the world's largest producer of the COVID vaccine, and the AstraZeneca vaccine being one of them. But only 2% of the population have been vaccinated.
Yes.
And at the same time that Modi wasn't vaccinating his people, instead he was sending the vaccines to neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Thailand, and Indonesia, as a way of chest bumping, to project Indian soft power. Look how great India is. India is the new emerging regional power, not China. It's us, and it's all because of Modi. And Modi had his picture put on the packages, very Trump-like. Modi had his own picture put on the packages of all his vaccine stocks. So you're in Bangladesh and you get these doctors get the vaccine, get smiling Modi on there, and so yeah, the people weren't getting vaccinated, but now India is not delivering these vaccines to neighboring countries, and now China regrettably is moving in to fill the void and use this as a public relations win for it to expand its influence and authoritarian rule in the region.
Do you think people are waking up to how insensitive Modi is towards his own people?
Yeah, I think this is a turning point for sure. I've been following Modi carefully and the Indian media carefully for the last 5 years, and this is the first time where the mainstream media, have turned on him. Mm-hmm. I mean, it didn't matter what he did. They just barely can bring themselves to say a critical word about the guy. It's like they're totally in fear of losing their readership, or viewers, if they speak out against Hindutva or Hindutva ideology or Hindu nationalism or the Modi government. But now you've seen figures in the media come forward and say this is totally 100% the fault of the Modi government. The reason we're dying and getting sick is because of his malfeasance. So yeah, I like what Trump's and I made this point in an article recently. When Trump's pollsters did an autopsy of the 2020 election, they found that it wasn't his racism or his xenophobia or his incompetency or his corruption which cost him election. It was none of these issues. What cost him election was, his mishandling of the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
And that's what they said. If it wasn't for the COVID pandemic, he would have won easily. Now, I believe this is going to have a similar cost on Modi, the same way it cost Trump. Fingers crossed.
So I think one of the things that happened was that COVID hit America during an election year. With Modi, we still have 2 more years to go. So unless
well, the virus has got another 2 years to go. So the virus probably has another 2 years to go.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That's what people don't understand, that this virus is not going away anytime soon. Like it mutates itself. So one of the fears here in the US is, so my grandmother was recently sick, right? And she's been vaccinated. She had Moderna, like both shots, and she got sick. She couldn't breathe. She was showing symptoms of COVID. I panicked. Right. And when I took her to the hospital, it turned out she had acute bronchitis. But what I feared was that someone had come to our temple from India and had in quarantine and had brought the Indian strain with them, because the Indian strain that is now, it is a mutated strain that isn't protected by 100% by the vaccines that we have here in America.
Yeah.
Yes, like if you get sick, you're probably not going to die. But again, an 88 to 90-year-old woman, like we don't know what's going to happen with her. That's the other scary thing. The vaccines that they're putting out, even AstraZeneca and the vaccines that are in India, are not tested against this strain. It is much, much more contagious. It's much more deadly.
Yeah,
And you
exactly.
know, like and that's the scary part, because this virus mutates really, really fast.
And that's why what's happening in India is like the worst nightmare. This is what epidemiologists feared the most, that you would have a crushing wave of infections in a big country like India or China, because now they really believe that there will be a vaccine-resistant mutant strain to emerge from India, which makes all of this vaccine effort totally moot, almost a total waste of time.
Yeah.
If that happens. I I toggle between mild optimism and bleak pessimism when it comes to this pandemic. Sometimes I think we're seeing the finish line, and other times I think to myself, this has got a long way to go.
You know, when the pandemic started, I was devastated because it happened in 2020. I was supposed to get married that June. And obviously, because I'm Indian, that to Punjabi, like we have these massive weddings. So that got postponed. And then every time like we talk about rescheduling, it's like, well, we really don't know like what's going on with the virus. Like, yeah, people are getting vaccinated, but when you have a virus that's mutating so quickly, do you actually want to take a chance? You know, I don't know, like especially with something like this, like the United States just shut down flights from India like a week ago, I want to say, or like a couple of days ago maybe. So you don't know what's already been here and what's going on and who has what. It's this thing is going to be here for a while.
A while. And the US isn't doing, I mean, the US long ago stopped contact tracing and long ago stopped genomic testing. So, the US really has no idea what strains and how many different versions of those strains are running around the United States at the moment.
Yeah.
All we can do is just hope for the best, but the worst seems quite possible.
Yeah. Anyways, okay, back to we have 10 minutes to go. Let me see if we have any good questions coming in.
Sure.
Okay.
I have not too much hate mail.
No, there was just someone that wants to join the conversation, which we're not going to do. So for the last 10 minutes, I really want to talk about the rise of Hindutva in or outside of India. For instance, there was somebody recently arrested in Australia who had RSS ties, and I don't know, did he attack a Sikh person or did he attack somebody else? But the rise of Hindutva in outside of India, what is its purpose? What are they trying to do, and how best to counter it?
Yeah, well, it's terrifying, and I've actually been sounding. I'm glad you asked this question because I've been sounding the alarm bell on this for some time. I've written a couple of articles, one for TRT World, and another from my column in Byline Times. The rise of Hindu nationalism amongst Indian expatriate communities in Canada, in Australia, in the United States, and as you pointed out in that illustration, you had a gang of right-wing Hindu extremists attack a car full of Sikhs. I think there was 3 Sikh men in this car, and these Sikh men had been participating in a farmers' protest, in a solidarity march for the farmers' protests. And this is about 6 weeks ago, I believe. You have a lot of these Hindu nationalist car rallies taking place in Australia at the moment. And when I spoke to a Sikh leader here last month, and he said he's lived in Australia for 25 years. And this is the first time, since the farmers' protest started, it's the first time in his life of living in Australia where he's seen a level of violence come within the Indian community, from one segment of the Indian expatriate community against another. And it's Hindu nationalists against Muslims and against Sikhs. And he said it's not just the violence which is taking place, it's also like calls for boycotts of Sikh-owned businesses and
Yes.
boycotts of Muslim-owned businesses amongst the Indian community. I mean, and to your question, what is the ultimate goal? Well, their ultimate goal here is to influence, Australian politics at the local level, at the state level, and the national level to favour, pro-Modi government policies, domestic policies, and foreign policies. And it's, these countries are completely asleep at the switch. I mean, if you're a member of, have any affiliation with Hamas or Hezbollah, which are political Islamic groups, or the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a politically Islamic group, you cannot enter Australia, and you cannot enter the United States. I'm not sure exactly about Canada, but I'm pretty sure Canada's the same way. But if you're a member of RSS or VHP, which are paramilitary Hindu extremist political organizations, which espouse violence, who have members who have espoused violence and have carried out acts of violence, you can just walk into these countries, not only walk into these countries, but join mainstream political parties in these countries and contest seats and win seats. I live in Melbourne, Australia, and in the last local elections, in a district quite far from me, on the other side of the city, you had a member of VHP rather, win the seat for the Liberal National Party. Well, the Liberal National Party is like the equivalent of the Republican Party in Australia. It's one of the two major political parties. So and which is the current federal government. So a Hindu nationalist militant is a member of the mainstream political party, and no one has any idea or clue, of the ideology or the kinds of views this person or individual believes and espouses.
It's funny because it's almost like these governments are allowing themselves to be infiltrated by Hindutva agents. You know what I mean? Like it's like, okay, you call yourself.
I just don't believe they've identified it as a threat, as a security threat at the moment. Just recently, you had the Australia's top diplomat meet with the chief of RSS in India and did a photo op with him and shaking hand and praising him for his the work he's done during COVID relief. I mean, this caused an uproar, obviously, amongst Indian expatriate groups. Going, you basically just praised a fascist who has, endorsed genocide and ethnic cleansing against Muslims and non-Hindu minorities. So, it just shows you, even at the highest level of Australia's diplomatic corps, they haven't even identified what RSS really is or what the Hindu ideology aims to achieve.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane. Here in the United States, so the Hindutva lobby. So there used to be like just an Indian lobby, and in recent years, what used to be the Indian lobby has become a Hindutva lobby.
Yeah,
is what has happened, and what ends up happening, like they're petitioning schools to not say that Hinduism, has a caste system. They're saying that the caste system was brought in by the Britishers, really just warping history. All right, we have 4 minutes. 4 minutes to go, but I want to talk about the Dalit community a little bit because that's a huge minority community in India that's also extremely under threat, especially under Modi's regime because, well, they believe in the caste system much more strongly.
Yeah. I mean, you're seeing, so many incidences of violence, particularly murder, and these attacks, rape and murder, are targeting young Dalit girls in particular. And you're seeing when these attacks, whether it's rape, assault, or murder, when the victim, the families of the victims try to bring charges against the perpetrator, I mean, they're almost laughed out of the police station and certainly laughed out of the courts. It shows you how entrenched the caste system is in India, and it really is a caste supremacy kind of country. I mean, you can't break, you can't fix India without addressing Hindu nationalism, but also addressing the way the caste system otherizes and minorities and the poor and privileges, the upper caste. But we're seeing a total dehumanization of Dalits. They're almost, you see that, these groups and individuals online, almost treating the killing or raping of Dalits as a sport.
Yes.
Now, and,
that's the most disgusting part of it. Like if I tweet about, the rape of a Dalit girl, like people, like the way they react, especially like the RSS lobby on Twitter, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's bad.
It's shocking. And I mean, it's become so normalized now that, this use of violence, and just moving away from Dalits at the moment. I mean, Hindu nationalists and, upper caste Indians that carry out these attacks, whether it's against a Muslim or a Sikh or a Dalit, I mean, they now willingly and voluntarily upload their violence onto social media. That's how the sense of the level of impunity they believe they have in carrying out these actions. They believe there's absolutely no consequence for it. And, coming back to that early point, they do see it as sport, because it's, like in sport, if you win or lose, there's really no consequence after the game is over. It's the same way with targeting, otherized minorities.
So sad. So sad. All right, CJ, we have hit an hour, so this is
lovely
about all the
talking to
time
you,
we have for today. So lovely talking to you too, and I'm so glad you can come on. And I'm sorry for that little glitch we had between the days last week. But any closing statements? Any closing remarks?
Oh no, I mean, just thanks for having us on the discussion, and I mean, thank you to you for using this enormous platform you have to not just to post pictures of yourself, as a lot of people do on Instagram, but to actually use your platform to raise awareness about these crucial issues. I mean, that's all the gratitude goes to you. So thanks so much for having me on.
That's so sweet. Thank you so much. Thank you, CJ. You have a great day. Okay.
You too. Thanks, Monica.
Bye. Bye. Bye.